Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support in helping us reach 1,000 subscribers. We're now aiming for 2,000, so please support us by subscribing and helping us reach this milestone. Now let's start the story. While installing new flooring in our kitchen, my wife didn't realize I was under the sink cabinet when her sister came over. Have you told him you're moving out next month? Her sister asked. No way. I need to secure my promotion first, then take half the accounts, my wife replied. They went on to discuss timing, all while I lay there silently, working. My anger grew, but I kept on with the renovation, never letting on that I'd heard everything. 5 days later, she regretted every word she'd said. This is all still fresh, hurts like a hammer dropped on my thumb, but I need to get it off my chest. Buckle up, because this isn't a quick fix job. My wife, Charlotte, and I have been married for 7 years. We bought our starter home 3 years ago. Nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom place with good bones, but outdated everything. Since I'm in the renovation business, I've been slowly fixing it up, room by room. Our relationship was like that house, solid foundation, decent structure, maybe needing a little work in places. At least, that's what I thought. Last month, Charlotte kept hinting that she wanted the kitchen done before summer. I noticed she'd been acting differently, working late, glued to her phone, taking calls in another room. Typical suspicious behavior, but I chalked it up to stress from her upcoming promotion. Like an idiot, I figured finishing the kitchen would make her happy, prove I was committed to our future. So, last Saturday, I started tearing out the old vinyl flooring, ugly, peeling stuff from the 90s. The plan was to install those vinyl planks that look like hardwood. Charlotte had picked the color herself, excited about how it would match the new backsplash we'd chosen. I'd already finished most of the demo work and was working on the plumbing under the sink, adjusting pipes to fit the new cabinet depth. I was lying on my back, half inside the sink cabinet with my tools spread around me, when I heard the front door open. Charlotte wasn't supposed to be home until after lunch. She'd gone for brunch with her sister, Hannah. They came in laughing about something, clearly not expecting me to be within earshot. I was about to call out when I heard Hannah ask, "Have you told him you're moving out next month?" My whole body went cold, like someone had dumped ice water down my spine. I froze, wrench in hand, barely breathing. Charlotte's laugh made me sick. No way. I need to secure my promotion first, then take half the accounts. Her voice was like nothing I'd ever heard before, calculated, cold. The timing has to be perfect. If I leave before the promotion goes through, I might not get it. But once I do, that's an extra 20 grand a year in my pocket. Hannah asked if she was worried I'd figure it out. Charlotte just scoffed, saying I was too busy playing with my tools to notice anything. Said I was predictable, that I'd be crushed but wouldn't fight back. Then they went on to discuss logistics. Charlotte already had an apartment lined up, had been slowly moving personal items to Hannah's place, and had a separate bank account I knew nothing about. 7 years together, and she was talking about me like I was some clueless fool she'd been putting up with. The rage that built inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. My hand gripped the wrench so hard. But I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Some instinct told me to stay put, to gather every piece of information I could. They moved into the living room, their voices fading but still audible. Charlotte was anxious about the joint accounts, wondering how to take as much as possible. Hannah suggested talking to her friend who had cleaned her ex out good during their divorce. They discussed timing like it was a strategic operation. Charlotte wanted to wait until after her parents' anniversary party next month so it wouldn't ruin their celebration. How considerate. I lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, until they decided to head back out to continue their shopping day. When the door finally closed, I crawled out from under that sink feeling like my chest had been hollowed out with a rusty spoon. You know what the worst part is? We've been talking about starting a family. I had been saving for fertility treatments because Charlotte has PCOS. 15 grand was sitting in an account specifically earmarked for our future family, a family she knew would never exist. I wandered around the half-demolished kitchen, my mind racing. My first impulse was to pack my things and be gone before she got home, or to confront her the second she walked through the door. But something held me back. The more I thought about her smug certainty that I wouldn't fight back, that I was too predictable, the more determined I became to prove her wrong. So, I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I went back to work. I funneled every ounce of rage into that floor installation. By the time Charlotte came home around 6 p.m., I had half the new flooring laid. Working with such mechanical precision, it was the only thing keeping me sane. She walked in all smiles, commenting on how good the floor looked. Asked if I wanted to order takeout since the kitchen was torn up. I smiled back and said sure. That night felt surreal. We ate Chinese food on the couch, watching some Netflix show I couldn't even focus on. She cuddled up next to me like everything was normal. She even initiated sex later, which now makes me wonder if it was guilt or just her keeping up appearances. I went through the motions, feeling nothing but disgust and rage. Every touch, every fake smile, it was like sandpaper against my soul. But I played my part, told her I loved her before we fell asleep, all while silently vowing she'd regret every word I'd overheard. Sleep wasn't happening. Once Charlotte's breathing steadied, I slipped out of bed and started my reconnaissance mission. Her phone was locked, but I knew her laptop password. Nothing suspicious in her emails that I could access. But then I checked our joint accounts online and noticed regular transfers of $200, $300 to her personal account over the past few months. More than the usual spending money she kept separate. Small enough that I hadn't noticed, but it added up to thousands. I took pictures of everything with my phone. Documentation would be key. By 3 a.m., I was sitting on our back porch, texting my buddy Andrew. Need to talk ASAP. Marriage emergency. Not joking. He responded immediately despite the hour. Tomorrow lunch. The usual spot. The next morning, I was back at the flooring installation before Charlotte even woke up. Acting normal was the hardest job I'd ever done. Harder than any renovation I've tackled. She kissed me goodbye, told me she was so lucky to have such a handy husband, and headed off to work. The second her car pulled away, I collapsed against the new cabinets, shaking with anger and betrayal. But I refused to be the predictable fool she thought I was. The renovation would continue exactly as she wanted, perfect, beautiful, everything she dreamed of. And while I worked, I'd build something else too. The perfect plan to make her regret ever thinking she could discard me like outdated vinyl flooring. By Sunday night, I had most of the flooring installed. The physical labor helped me process the shock. Every nail I drove and felt like I was securing a piece of my resolve. Every measured cut a calculated step in my emerging plan. Charlotte was all compliments and affection, even brought me a beer while I worked, talking about how excited she was for the finished kitchen. Monday was when things really started to shift into gear. Lunch with Andrew was exactly what I needed. We met at our usual sandwich spot, and the second I told him what happened, his concern turned to fury on my behalf. You gotta hit back harder than she expects. Man, he said between bites. She thinks you're predictable. Show her how wrong she is. We spent the lunch break outlining my next steps, separating finances, documenting everything, consulting a lawyer before she could make her move. Andrew's brother went through a nasty divorce last year, so he had the playbook ready. His main advice was simple: don't show your cards too early. Get everything lined up first. The element of surprise is your only advantage right now. I went back to work on the renovation that evening with renewed purpose. Charlotte texted that she'd be home late. Work dinner, she called it. Yeah, right. I used the time alone to start making moves. First, I called my bank and opened a new individual account. Second, I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney Andrew recommended for Wednesday during my lunch break. While installing the last section of flooring, I found Charlotte's old journal behind the refrigerator. It must have fallen back there during the initial cabinet removal. I'm not proud of it, but I read it. Entries from the past 2 months confirmed everything. She'd been planning this for a while, writing about feeling stuck and ready for her next chapter, mentioning some guy from work named Russell multiple times. Nothing explicitly stating they were having an affair, but enough innuendo to make it clear something was happening. The entry that really hit me was dated just 3 weeks ago. Talking about fertility treatments again. Feel guilty, but what's the point in starting that process when I'm leaving? Would just complicate the exit plan. Better to keep stalling. That night, when she came home smelling faintly of wine and wearing makeup that had been refreshed, I almost lost it. Almost threw the journal in her face and watched her world implode. But I remembered Andrew's advice: strategic patience. Let her believe her plan was working while I dismantled it piece by piece. Kitchen's looking amazing, babe, she said, kissing my cheek. You're so talented. This is going to add so much value to the house. The irony wasn't lost on me. Value she planned to cash in on without me. Just want you to be happy, I replied, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. I was happy she could lie right to my face without a flicker of remorse. So happy with you. I nodded and turned back to my work, unwilling to meet her gaze for fear my expression would betray everything. That's when I decided this renovation would be my masterpiece, and my revenge would be just as meticulously crafted. Tuesday morning, Charlotte left for work early for a big presentation. I called in sick to my own job and spent the day gathering intel and preparing. I photographed all our important documents, made copies of tax returns, and took inventory of everything valuable in the house, noting dates of purchase and approximate values. I checked all our account balances and took screenshots. By Tuesday night, I had a complete picture of our financial situation and was refining my strategy. The kitchen was nearly done, just needed to install the new sink and finish the backsplash. Charlotte was over the moon with compliments when she got home, talking about hosting a dinner party to show off my hard work. The audacity was breathtaking. She was planning a dinner party for friends she intended to keep after discarding me, in the kitchen I built for her. Looking at her across that half-finished room, it hit me just how completely I had misread our entire relationship. The foundation wasn't solid, it was rotten through and through. Something wrong? She asked, noticing my expression. Just tired, I lied. Been pushing hard to get this done for you. She smiled, apparently satisfied with my answer. It'll be worth it. This kitchen is going to be amazing. Yeah, I agreed, turning back to the sink installation. You have no idea how amazing it's going to be. As I worked late into the night, I could hear her on the phone in our bedroom, her voice low, probably talking to Hannah about their plan. Or maybe Russell. At that point, the details didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what I would do next. By Wednesday morning, I had the skeleton of my plan in place. 5 days. That's how long I estimated I'd need to get everything lined up. 5 days of pretending, of renovation work, of careful preparation. 5 days until Charlotte would regret every word she'd said under that sink. And she wouldn't even see it coming. Here's what happened in the 5 days after I discovered my wife's plans to leave me. Day 1, Wednesday. The morning after my lunch with Andrew, I woke up with an eerie clarity. Charlotte was already gone an early meeting, according to her text. The house felt different, like when you're about to flip a property and can see past the mess to what it could become. My consultation with the divorce attorney was eye-opening. I brought copies of all our financial documents, and she listened to my story without flinching. She explained how critical it was that I had learned about Charlotte's plans before she executed them. In my state, cleaning out joint accounts isn't technically illegal between spouses. If Charlotte had grabbed everything first, it would have been a nightmare. That afternoon, I opened a new individual account at a different bank. I moved exactly half of our joint savings, $37,000. Not a penny more than my fair share. I wasn't going to play dirty like Charlotte planned to, but I wasn't going to be a doormat, either. When I got home, I went straight back to work on the kitchen. The backsplash tile was a complicated herringbone pattern Charlotte had picked out, labor-intensive as hell, but it would look amazing once finished. Charlotte came home around 7, carrying takeout again. She mentioned her promotion might come through earlier than expected, which immediately set off alarm bells. From what I'd overheard, her entire exit strategy was tied to that promotion's timeline. She showed me some shoes she'd bought online, the 3rd pair this month. The old Charlotte was careful with money. This new Charlotte was living like the joint accounts were already hers alone. Once I heard her go upstairs, I texted Andrew an update. He replied immediately, "Good first steps. Tomorrow we go nuclear on Operation GTFO. Day 2, Thursday. Day 2 was all about documentation and gathering intel. Yeah, I know how that sounds. But when your wife is plotting to clean you out, you get intense about it. I photographed everything valuable in our house before Charlotte was even up, creating a spreadsheet that noted when each item was purchased and by whom. While Charlotte was in the shower, I quickly checked her planner. There it was, meeting with Janine. 1 p.m. Janine was her friend who'd gone through a divorce. The same friend who, according to Charlotte's sister, had cleaned out her ex good. Around noon, I installed a parental monitoring app on our shared laptop. Charlotte used it far more than I did, and I needed to know what she was planning. By mid-afternoon, I'd finished the backsplash and was installing the new cabinet handles. Charlotte had picked out matte black ones that cost way more than they should have. Andrew came by after work with beer and pizza. We sat on the back deck where the neighbors couldn't overhear, and I brought him up to speed. I asked if I was overreacting. Andrew just gave me this look like I was being the world's biggest dumbass. He reminded me about her secret bank account, the planned apartment, the hidden moving of personal items to her sister's place. When we heard Charlotte's car in the driveway, Andrew left through the back gate. Charlotte walked in almost giddy. She came up behind me, wrapped her arms around my waist, and said the promotion was basically a done deal. She'd likely have the official offer by Monday or Tuesday next week. That night, as we lay in bed, Charlotte snuggled up against me like everything was normal. She asked if the kitchen would be done by Saturday for a potential get-together. I told her it would be done tomorrow, actually ahead of schedule. After she fell asleep, I checked the monitoring app. There were new emails between Charlotte and Hannah discussing the apartment lease. Charlotte had signed it yesterday. Move-in date was set for exactly 4 weeks from now. Day 3, Friday. Friday was all about grinding through the last details. I had most of the kitchen done, but there were still finishing touches: under cabinet lighting, caulking, final paint touch-ups. First, I went to our safe and removed my grandmother's jewelry that Charlotte sometimes wore. Family heirlooms that were never technically hers. I packaged them carefully and drove them to my parents' house for safekeeping. Next, I went to the bank and closed our joint credit card account. I opened a new one in just my name at a different bank. While I was out, I called the fertility clinic and explained that I needed to close our account. The $15,000 we'd saved would be returned within 5 to 7 business days. I gave them my new individual account details. Back at the house, I put the finishing touches on the kitchen. As I installed the last piece of molding, I felt this twisted sense of pride. I'd built something beautiful, something she would barely get to enjoy. But I wasn't quite finished. There was one last special feature I wanted to add. I carefully removed the new cabinet under the sink, the very spot I'd been working under when I overheard their conversation. Inside the wall, I left a sealed Ziploc bag containing a printed transcript of everything I'd heard her say that day, along with copies of her apartment lease, bank transfers, and journal entries. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying. You have no idea. When Charlotte got home, she squealed at the sight of the completed kitchen, said it was even better than she'd imagined. We ended up getting sushi delivered while she snapped photos for Instagram. #KitchenReno, #DreamKitchen, #BlissfulHomeLife. Later, she came downstairs wearing lingerie I'd never seen before, claiming she wanted to properly christen the new kitchen. For a moment, I almost broke. Almost told her I knew everything. But I reminded myself 2 more days. Just 2 more days until my plan was fully in place. So I went through the motions, feeling nothing but contempt with every touch. Later, I checked the monitoring app again. She'd texted Hannah, "Kitchen looks amazing. Almost feel bad about the timing, but not really. He'll find another house to fix up, lol." Day 4, Saturday. Saturday morning, Charlotte was all enthusiasm about hosting friends that evening to show off the kitchen. While she was out shopping, I finalized my financial preparations, changed my direct deposit, made copies of all important documents, downloaded our photos from the shared cloud storage. Andrew came by to help me move some of my essential belongings to his garage. Nothing Charlotte would immediately notice was missing, but things I couldn't afford to lose in the chaos of separation. He asked if I was sure about waiting until tomorrow. Wouldn't it be better to do it before she had friends over? I explained my reasoning. I wanted her to have her moment, to think everything was going perfectly. The higher she felt tonight, the harder tomorrow's fall would be. By 6, guests started arriving. Hannah came first, giving me this weird, sympathetic hug that made me wonder exactly how much she knew. The evening itself was surreal. I grilled steaks, poured drinks, laughed at jokes, all while watching Charlotte play the role of the perfect, happy wife. During dinner, the conversation turned to future plans. One couple mentioned they were thinking about starting a family, and everyone looked at us expectantly. Without missing a beat, Charlotte launched into a whole spiel about how we were planning to start trying soon. I nearly choked on my beer. The audacity was stunning. Hannah caught my eye across the table, looking slightly uncomfortable. At least she had the decency to feel some guilt about the lie. Day 5, Sunday. The final day arrived with perfect symbolism, dark clouds, and a forecast for severe thunderstorms. Charlotte was still asleep when I got up and made coffee. I sat at our kitchen island, admiring my handiwork one last time. I'd planned every detail of this day. Charlotte's parents were coming over for lunch, her idea, not mine. She wanted to show them the kitchen. Everyone who mattered to her would be there to witness what came next. As I sipped my coffee, I felt strangely calm. The panic and rage had hardened into something cold and resolved. I was no longer hanging drywall in a storm. I was installing the final, perfect piece of crown molding on a masterpiece of revenge. Charlotte finally came downstairs around 9, yawning and asking if I'd made enough coffee for her. She didn't even notice my mood, too busy checking her phone and making plans for lunch. Her parents were due at noon. I had 3 hours left of pretending 3 hours until I tore down the life Charlotte thought she'd constructed so carefully. The storm broke just as they arrived, rain pounding against our new kitchen windows as I welcomed them in. A perfect, dramatic backdrop to what would be the most important renovation reveal of my life. And unlike Charlotte, I had no intention of delaying my own demolition day. Not by a single minute. Well, here it is. The day my wife finally realized she'd messed with the wrong contractor. Pour yourself a drink, this is a long one. Sunday morning felt different. You know that calm before you tear down a wall, when everything's prepped, tools are laid out, and you're just waiting for the moment to swing the sledgehammer? That was me, sitting at the kitchen island, drinking coffee, watching the storm clouds gather outside. Charlotte came downstairs around 9, still half asleep and completely oblivious to what was coming. She poured herself coffee and started rambling about lunch prep for her parents. I nodded at all the right moments while scrolling through my phone, double-checking that everything was ready. I'd barely slept the night before, not from nerves, but because I wanted to be sure I remembered every detail of what was about to happen. 7 years of marriage was about to come crashing down, and I intended to be fully present for it. Charlotte's mom texted that they were running 15 minutes late. Charlotte seemed annoyed. She always hated when her precious schedules got disrupted. She started chopping vegetables for a salad, commenting on how the new countertops made prep work so much easier. The irony was sharp. She was admiring the craftsmanship of a kitchen she planned to enjoy without me. While she worked, I set my phone up on the windowsill, angled toward the kitchen island, and hit record. Not for legal reasons, my state is two-party consent, but for my own sanity. For when Charlotte inevitably tried to twist what happened. Around 12:15, the doorbell rang. Charlotte's parents arrived, looking damp from the rain but cheerful. Her dad, Timothy, immediately commented on the exterior paint job I'd done last summer. Her mom, Denise, brought flowers for the table, always thoughtful like that. I'd always liked Charlotte's parents, which made what was coming even harder. Charlotte led them on the grand tour of the kitchen, pointing out all the features as if she'd built them herself. Her parents made the appropriate noises of admiration. Timothy asked about the cost, and Charlotte waved it off, saying we'd discuss numbers later. I almost laughed. She had no idea what numbers we'd actually be discussing soon. As Charlotte finished the tour, Denise asked when we were planning to have people over to see it. Charlotte mentioned we'd already had friends over last night and was considering hosting her work team next weekend. I just smiled, knowing there wouldn't be any work team dinner next weekend. We all settled around the dining table for lunch. Charlotte had made her mom's lasagna recipe, one of the few dishes she actually cooked well. As we ate, the conversation naturally shifted to her upcoming promotion. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Charlotte went on about how excited she was for this next step in her career, how it would mean more money for our future. She even reached over and squeezed my hand while saying it, the ultimate performance of the devoted, loving wife. Her dad raised his glass in a toast to her success. Everyone clinked glasses, and in that brief moment of celebration, I decided it was time. After taking a sip, I set my glass down carefully and said I had an announcement, something to add to the celebration. Everyone turned to me expectantly, Charlotte wearing that look half curious, half irritated at having her spotlight interrupted. I smiled and said I discovered something interesting under the sink last weekend while working on the renovation. Charlotte's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen a few times, and set it in the middle of the table. The recording I'd made began to play, Charlotte and Hannah's voices crystal clear. Have you told him you're moving out next month? No way. I need to secure my promotion first, then take half the accounts. I trimmed the audio to just the most damning 30 seconds. As it played, I watched the blood drain from Charlotte's face. Her parents went completely still, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. When it finished, there was a moment of absolute silence, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows. Charlotte's mom was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper as she asked if that was really her on the recording. Charlotte's face cycled through shock, embarrassment, and finally settled on anger. She turned to me, hurling every insult she could muster. How dare I record her private conversations? This was illegal. I was manipulating the situation, taking things out of context. I just sat there, letting her dig herself deeper with every denial. When she finally ran out of steam, I calmly explained that I hadn't recorded their original conversation. I'd been under the sink working when they came in. I'd heard every word as it happened. Her dad pushed his plate away and asked Charlotte if it was true. Was she really planning to leave? Had she already rented an apartment? Was she planning to clean out the accounts? Charlotte started crying, but not genuine tears. They were the same manipulative tears she'd used before when caught in lies. She claimed I was a terrible husband, that I'd neglected her for years, that I was emotionally unavailable, accusations that seemed to come out of nowhere. Her mom reached across the table and took her hand, asking why Charlotte hadn't said anything to them about problems in our marriage. Charlotte stammered something about not wanting to worry them, clearly trying to salvage the situation and twist herself into the victim. That's when I laid out everything else I'd discovered. The secret bank account, the apartment lease she'd signed, the jewelry and personal items she'd already moved to Hannah's place. The texts and emails detailing how Charlotte planned to maximize what she could take from our joint finances only deepened the horror on her parents' faces. With each revelation, her dad shook his head in disbelief, and her mom's tears streamed down her face. Charlotte made one last, desperate attempt to flip the narrative, accusing me of having someone else on the side, that it must be why I was doing this. I just laughed and pulled out my phone again, scrolling to the screenshots I'd taken of her texts with someone named Russell from her work. Nothing outright stating an affair, but the flirtatious messages were enough to suggest something inappropriate was going on. That's when her dad stood up. He's an old-school guy with a strong moral compass. He told Charlotte that he and her mother needed to leave and take some time to process everything. The disappointment in his eyes was devastating, not for me, but for Charlotte, who had always been Daddy's perfect little girl. As they gathered their things, her mom hugged me and whispered she was so sorry. Her dad shook my hand firmly and said he'd call me later. Neither of them could bring themselves to look at Charlotte. The moment the door closed behind them, Charlotte's fake tears dried up instantly. She went straight into attack mode, screaming about how I'd ruined everything, how I had destroyed her relationship with her parents, how I'd never understand why she needed to leave. I just stood there, oddly calm as she unraveled. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I told her I had one more announcement. While she'd been planning her exit strategy, I'd been implementing mine. I explained that I'd already moved half of our savings to an account in my name only. I'd closed our joint credit cards. I'd contacted the fertility clinic and redirected the $15,000 we'd saved for treatments to my personal account. I'd documented every valuable item in the house with proof of purchase and ownership. Her face shifted from rage to panic as she realized what all of this meant. Her entire plan to blindside me and drain our finances had been completely derailed. She grabbed her phone, frantically trying to check our accounts. Her hands were shaking so badly, she dropped it twice before finally managing to log in. I watched as the reality sank and half of our money was already gone. Legally gone. Moved to accounts she couldn't touch. That's when her tactics shifted again. Suddenly, she was sobbing, insisting it had all been a mistake. That she'd been confused and scared about our future. That Hannah had been putting ideas in her head. That she never actually planned to go through with it. I asked her about the apartment lease, the secret bank account, the personal items she'd already moved to Hannah's place. She had no answers. In what had to be her last act of desperation, she stepped closer, placing her hand on my chest. She said we could work through this, that she was sorry and wanted to try again, that the promotion would mean more money for both of us. I stepped back and told her I'd already consulted with a divorce attorney. The paperwork was ready to be filed first thing tomorrow morning. I'd even been generous. I wasn't asking for alimony, despite having supported her through grad school in the early years of our marriage. All I wanted was a clean break and what was fairly mine. The look on her face is something I'll never forget. The moment she realized she had completely misjudged me, that her assumption about me being predictable and unwilling to fight back was dead wrong. While she'd been plotting to discard me, I'd been 10 steps ahead the entire time. She asked where I was going. I told her I'd already arranged to stay with Andrew for a while until I found a new place, and that I'd be moving my things out today. Charlotte followed me upstairs, still trying every angle to salvage the situation. Now, her concerns weren't about our relationship, but about appearances, how people would perceive her, how this could impact her promotion, and what it would mean if she lost the house she adored. As I packed a suitcase with clothes, I made it clear that I had no intention of badmouthing her to friends or her workplace. That wasn't my style, but I also wouldn't lie if people asked what happened. When I finished packing the essentials, I headed back downstairs with Charlotte trailing behind, alternating between threats and pleas. I paused in the kitchen for one last moment. Gesturing around the beautiful space I created, I told her I'd left one final surprise, something she wouldn't discover unless the kitchen was renovated again someday. I refused to tell her what it was, only that it would serve as a time capsule marking the end of our marriage. The not knowing would drive her crazy, exactly as I intended. Every time she used that kitchen, she'd wonder what message I'd left sealed away behind the perfect backsplash tiles or under the sink cabinet. Before leaving, I handed her a folder containing copies of everything I'd uncovered: the apartment lease, bank statements, text messages, journal entries. I told her the originals were safely stored elsewhere, not as a threat, but so she'd understand denying her actions was pointless. As I loaded my suitcase into my truck, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight broke through the clouds. Charlotte stood in the doorway, arms crossed, mascara streaked down her face. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness for what could have been. 7 years is a long time to spend with someone, even when the foundation turns out to be rotten. I got into my truck and drove to Andrew's place. He was waiting on his porch with a beer for each of us. No questions, no I told you so. Just solid support when I needed it most. That night, Charlotte blew up my phone with texts, first angry, then apologetic, then desperate. I read them all, but didn't respond. Her sister Hannah called twice, but I let it go to voicemail. Charlotte's mom texted once, just to say she was thinking of me and hoped I was okay. I slept better that night than I had in a week, even on Andrew's lumpy guest bed. The relief of no longer carrying that secret, of no longer having to pretend, was indescribable. Monday morning, my attorney filed the divorce papers. Monday afternoon, Charlotte's promotion was officially announced. I saw it on LinkedIn. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. She achieved her professional goal the very same day her personal life completely fell apart. By Tuesday, she'd already removed her relationship status from Facebook. It's been 3 weeks now. I found a small apartment closer to work and have thrown myself into projects, staying busy to keep from dwelling on everything. Some days are harder than others. You can't unravel 7 years overnight. Charlotte tried reaching out a few more times, even showed up at Andrew's place once looking for me. I've kept all communication strictly through the attorney. It's cleaner that way. Friends have mostly taken sides, as expected. Some were shocked. Others admitted they'd noticed signs of trouble. A few have tried to play peacemaker, suggesting we try counseling. They mean well, but don't understand that some foundations are too compromised to rebuild. Yesterday, I drove past our house and saw a for sale sign out front. Seems Charlotte doesn't want to live with the kitchen I built her after all. Maybe she can't handle knowing there's something hidden in the walls. Maybe the space holds too many memories. Or maybe she just needs the money now that her exit strategy fell apart. Whatever the reason, seeing that sign felt like the final act of demolition. The structure of our marriage has been completely dismantled, torn down to the bare earth. And you know what? I'm ready to start building something new. This time, on solid ground. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.